Maria Santos had always been different from other girls in her small Texas border town. While her classmates spent afternoons at the mall or gossiping about boys, she was in the desert with her grandfather, learning to track animals and read the wind patterns. Her grandfather, a former Mexican Army scout, noticed something special in Maria's eyes, a sharpness that reminded him of the hunting birds he'd worked with decades ago. At 17, Maria could spot a rabbit from 2 miles away and track a deer through rocky terrain that would confuse experienced hunters. Her friends thought she was weird for spending so much time outdoors, but Maria felt alive in the wilderness. She understood the language of the desert, how the sand shifted in the wind, how animals moved when danger approached, and, most importantly, how to become invisible when she needed to. The day that changed everything started like any other. Maria was working her part-time job at the local sporting goods store when 3 men in military uniforms walked in. They weren't shopping for camping gear like most customers. Instead, they seemed to be studying her as she helped other customers. Maria noticed them immediately. Their posture was too straight, their eyes too alert, and they moved like predators assessing territory. One of the men approached her counter. He was tall with graying hair and had the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent in harsh conditions. His name tag read Commander Phillips. He asked about binoculars, but Maria could tell he was testing her knowledge. She answered his questions with precision that surprised him, explaining the differences between various optical systems and their effectiveness in different terrains. What happened next would puzzle Maria for weeks. Commander Phillips asked her an odd question: if you had to watch a building from a mile away without being seen, where would you position yourself? Most people would have been confused or suspicious, but Maria's mind immediately began working through the problem. She described wind patterns, sun angles, natural camouflage, and escape routes with the kind of detail that made the 3 men exchange meaningful looks. Before leaving, Commander Phillips handed her a business card that simply said U.S. Navy Special Operations with a phone number. He told her to call if she ever wanted to do something important with her unique skills. Maria stuffed the card in her pocket, thinking it was probably a recruitment gimmick. She had no idea that these men had been watching her for months, following reports from local law enforcement about a teenage girl who had helped find 3 missing hikers in terrain that had stumped professional search and rescue teams. The truth was that the Navy SEALs were facing a problem they'd never encountered before. Their missions were becoming increasingly complex, requiring surveillance capabilities that went beyond traditional military training. They needed someone who could disappear into any environment, observe targets for days without detection, and provide intelligence that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Their search for such a person had led them to small towns across America, looking for individuals with extraordinary natural abilities. Maria's reputation in her community was growing. Local police had started calling her when they needed help tracking suspects through difficult terrain. Border Patrol agents had quietly begun consulting with her about movement patterns they couldn't understand. Word of her abilities had reached the right ears in military intelligence circles, leading to the visit that would change her life forever. That evening, Maria sat in her bedroom staring at the business card. Her grandfather knocked on her door and sat beside her on the bed. Without saying a word, he looked at the card and nodded slowly. He told her about his own military service, about the young soldiers he'd trained to become invisible in the jungle. He explained that some people are born with gifts that can serve a greater purpose, but only if they're brave enough to use them. Maria's mother was terrified when her daughter explained the encounter. She'd raised Maria alone since her father died in a construction accident when Maria was 12, and the thought of losing her only child to military service filled her with dread. But Maria's grandfather reminded them both that running from destiny rarely led to happiness. He could see in Maria's eyes that she was already making her decision. 3 days later, Maria called the number on the card. Commander Phillips answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting for her call. He explained that she would need to undergo extensive testing and evaluation before anything could move forward. The process would be difficult and might last months. Many candidates never made it through the preliminary stages. But, if she proved capable, she would become part of something unprecedented in military history. The testing began 2 weeks later at a facility that Maria was told never to discuss with anyone. She was driven to a remote location in Nevada where she met 12 other candidates, all of them exceptional in different ways. There was a former Olympic archer, a professional tracker from Alaska, a mathematics prodigy who could calculate trajectories in her head, and others whose skills seemed almost supernatural. For the first week, they underwent physical fitness tests that pushed their bodies to the breaking point. Maria discovered muscles she didn't know she had and learned to function on 3 hours of sleep. But the physical challenges were just the beginning. The real tests measured their ability to remain undetected while gathering intelligence under extreme conditions. Maria's first major test took place in a mock urban environment built to resemble a Middle Eastern city. Her mission was to observe a target building for 48 hours and report on the movements of everyone entering and leaving. She would be competing against the other candidates, with military instructors actively hunting for them using thermal imaging, motion detectors, and trained dogs. While other candidates tried to find hiding spots in buildings or underground tunnels, Maria studied the environment differently. She noticed how the wind carried scents, where shadows fell at different times of day, and how the local wildlife behaved when humans were nearby. Instead of hiding from the hunters, she learned to move with them, staying just close enough to avoid their search patterns while maintaining her observation post. On the second day of the exercise, something happened that would earn Maria her nickname. One of the instructors, a veteran SEAL named Chief Rodriguez, was leading a team trying to locate the candidates. He was known for his ability to find anyone, anywhere. Rodriguez had spent the morning systematically searching every possible hiding spot near the target building, growing frustrated as he failed to locate a single candidate. As Rodriguez paused to radio his team, something made him look up at the sky. A falcon was circling overhead, riding the thermal currents with effortless grace. The bird seemed to be watching everything below with predatory focus. Rodriguez admired the creature for a moment before continuing his search, unaware that he was being observed by someone who had learned to embody the very essence of that hunting bird. Maria had positioned herself on a rooftop where her silhouette blended with ventilation equipment and satellite dishes. She wore clothing that matched the sun-bleached concrete and moved only when the wind stirred debris around her. For 48 hours, she remained virtually motionless, taking notes on everyone who entered or left the target building. She documented shift changes, delivery schedules, and security patterns with the kind of detailed precision that impressed even seasoned intelligence analysts. When the exercise ended and candidates were called in, Maria emerged from a location that made several instructors question whether she had actually been there the entire time. Chief Rodriguez was the first to see her climb down from her observation post. He watched in amazement as she seemed to materialize from what he had assumed was empty rooftop space. That evening, as instructors compared notes on the exercise, Rodriguez kept thinking about the falcon he'd seen circling overhead. The comparison became obvious to everyone over the following weeks. Maria moved like a hunting bird, patient, focused, and deadly accurate when she struck. She could remain motionless for hours, then move with sudden, precise action when necessary. Her awareness of her surroundings was so acute that she seemed to sense threats before they materialized. Most importantly, she had the kind of predatory instinct that made her exceptional at reading human behavior and predicting what people would do next. By the end of the first month, half the original candidates had been eliminated. Maria not only survived but began to excel in ways that surprised her instructors. She could infiltrate secure areas that others couldn't reach, gather intelligence that others missed, and escape from situations that trapped more experienced operators. Her success rate in training exercises was unprecedented, leading to whispered conversations among the training staff about whether they had found something truly special. The nickname Falcon stuck after Maria completed her most challenging test yet. She was tasked with gathering intelligence on a heavily guarded compound while avoiding detection by an entire platoon of Marines who had been told to prevent any infiltration. The exercise was designed to be nearly impossible, intended to identify the absolute limits of each candidate's abilities. Maria spent 3 days studying the compound from a distance, learning the routines of every guard and identifying weaknesses in their security procedures. On the fourth night, she infiltrated the facility, photographed sensitive documents, and extracted without triggering a single alarm. The Marines never knew she had been there until the exercise ended and they were shown the evidence of her success. Commander Phillips realized that they had found exactly what they were looking for. Maria possessed a combination of natural ability, intelligence, and instinct that couldn't be taught in any military school. She was ready to begin the next phase of her training, which would prepare her for missions that most people couldn't imagine. The question was whether she was ready for the reality of what being a military intelligence operative would actually mean for her life. Maria's advanced training began at a classified facility in Virginia where she learned skills that transformed her from a talented tracker into a professional intelligence operative. The instructors were former SEALs, CIA operatives, and military intelligence specialists who had spent their careers in the world's most dangerous places. They taught her advanced surveillance techniques, urban camouflage, close-quarters combat, and, most importantly, how to think like the enemy she would eventually face. The training was unlike anything Maria had experienced. She learned to pick locks in complete darkness, memorize complex building layouts after a single walkthrough, and communicate using signals so subtle that trained observers would miss them. She studied languages, cultural customs, and religious practices from regions where she might operate. Every day brought new challenges that pushed her abilities to their limits and beyond. 6 months into her advanced training, Maria received her first real-world assignment. Intelligence had identified a suspected terrorist cell operating in a major American city. Traditional surveillance methods had failed because the suspects were extremely security conscious and seemed to detect any official presence. Maria would be inserted into the situation with minimal backup, tasked with gathering enough evidence to either eliminate the threat or prove the suspects were innocent. The mission took place in Detroit, where the suspected cell was believed to be planning an attack on a major transportation hub. Maria was given a cover identity as a college student studying urban photography. This would allow her to move freely through the city while carrying surveillance equipment disguised as camera gear. She had 3 weeks to determine whether the suspects posed a real threat. Maria's target was a small group of men who met regularly at a coffee shop in a predominantly Middle Eastern neighborhood. Previous attempts to monitor them had failed because they seemed to sense when they were being watched. Federal agents had tried various approaches, but the suspects always modified their behavior when law enforcement was nearby. Maria's job was to get close enough to understand their activities without triggering their security instincts. For the first week, Maria established her cover by actually taking photographs around the city. She became a familiar presence in the neighborhood, chatting with shopkeepers and developing a reputation as a friendly art student working on a project about urban communities. Her apparent innocence and genuine interest in the area helped her blend in naturally, making her invisible to people who were specifically watching for threats. The breakthrough came during her second week when Maria noticed something that previous surveillance teams had missed. The suspected terrorists weren't planning an attack at all. They were actually members of an informal neighborhood watch group, concerned about drug activity in their community. Their secretive behavior stemmed from fear of retaliation from dealers, not from terrorist planning. Their meetings were focused on coordinating with police and social services to address community problems. Maria's detailed observations revealed the truth about the situation. She documented the suspects' actual activities, recorded their conversations about community improvement projects, and identified the real source of suspicious behavior that had triggered the investigation. Her report prevented a potentially disastrous raid on innocent civilians while redirecting resources toward addressing the actual drug trafficking that was threatening the neighborhood. Commander Phillips was impressed with Maria's first mission success, but, more importantly, he was pleased with her judgment and restraint. Many operatives in her position might have tried to find evidence to support the original suspicion rather than accept that the intelligence had been wrong. Maria's ability to see the truth regardless of preconceptions proved that she possessed the analytical skills necessary for complex intelligence work. Her next assignment was significantly more dangerous. Intelligence reports suggested that a foreign operative was attempting to recruit assets within American military installations. The suspect was believed to be using a series of academic conferences as cover for making contact with potential recruits. Maria would attend these conferences, identify the operative, and determine the scope of his activities. The conferences took place over 6 months in different cities across the United States. Maria's cover was as a graduate student researching military history, which gave her legitimate reasons to attend events where military personnel might be present. Her job was to identify recruitment attempts while avoiding detection by a professional spy who would be specifically watching for American intelligence operatives. The foreign operative turned out to be a professor from a European university who had been cultivating relationships with American military personnel for over 2 years. He was sophisticated in his approach, using academic discussions and research collaborations to build trust before gradually introducing more sensitive topics. Maria spent months observing his methods and identifying his targets. What made this mission particularly challenging was that the operative was genuinely talented at reading people. He seemed to sense when someone was watching him too closely and would modify his behavior accordingly. Maria had to develop new techniques for surveillance that went beyond anything she had learned in training. She learned to observe him indirectly, using reflections, shadows, and the behavior of other people to track his movements and activities. The case became personal for Maria when she discovered that one of the operative's targets was a young Marine who reminded her of boys she had grown up with in Texas. The Marine was struggling financially and had been approached by the operative with offers of paid research assistance that seemed legitimate but were actually designed to provide access to classified information. Maria realized that she couldn't simply observe this situation, she needed to actively prevent an American serviceman from making a mistake that would ruin his life. Working with her handlers, Maria developed a plan to expose the operative without revealing her own role. She arranged for the Marine to receive information that would make him suspicious of the professor's true motives. This required careful coordination and timing, as any misstep could alert the operative that he was under surveillance or could result in the Marine being charged with security violations. The plan worked perfectly. The Marine became suspicious and reported the recruitment attempt to military security. This led to the operative's exposure and arrest, while protecting both the Marine's career and Maria's cover identity. The operation demonstrated Maria's ability to think strategically about complex problems and execute sophisticated plans under pressure. Following the success of this mission, Maria was assigned to an elite joint task force that operated in the gray areas between military and intelligence work. The team consisted of specialists from different agencies who tackled problems that didn't fit neatly into any single organization's mandate. Maria's role was as the team's primary surveillance specialist, responsible for gathering intelligence in situations where traditional methods wouldn't work. Her new teammates included explosives experts, computer specialists, psychological operations officers, and combat veterans with specialized skills. They operated out of a facility that officially didn't exist, working on cases that ranged from counterterrorism to industrial espionage to diplomatic security. Maria quickly earned their respect by solving surveillance problems that had stumped more experienced operatives. One of her most challenging assignments with the task force involved investigating suspicious activities at a multinational corporation that had contracts with the Department of Defense. Intelligence suggested that foreign agents might be using the company to access sensitive information about American military technology. Maria's job was to infiltrate the corporate environment and determine whether the threat was real. This mission required Maria to learn an entirely new set of skills. Corporate espionage was different from military intelligence work because the environment was more complex and the rules less clear. She had to navigate office politics, understand business processes, and blend in with professionals who had very different backgrounds and motivations than the military personnel she was used to working around. Maria's cover was as a consultant hired to evaluate the company's security procedures. This gave her legitimate access to most areas of the facility while providing a reasonable explanation for her interest in sensitive information. She spent weeks learning the company's culture, identifying key personnel, and mapping information flows within the organization. The investigation revealed a sophisticated operation involving several foreign nationals who had been placed in strategic positions within the company over a period of years. They were systematically gathering information about American military technology and passing it to foreign intelligence services. The operation was so well integrated into the company's normal operations that it had gone undetected for over 3 years. Maria's detailed surveillance and analysis provided the evidence necessary to expose the entire network. Her work led to multiple arrests and prevented the compromise of several critical military programs. The case demonstrated her ability to adapt her skills to new environments and threats, proving that her talents extended far beyond traditional military applications. By this point in her career, Maria had earned recognition as one of the most effective intelligence operatives in the American military system. Her success rate was unprecedented, and her methods were being studied and copied by other agencies. She had proven that the investment in her training and development had been worthwhile, but she was about to face her greatest challenge yet. Intelligence reports were indicating increased terrorist activity in several overseas locations where American interests were at risk. The threats were sophisticated and well coordinated, suggesting the involvement of professional military or intelligence personnel. Traditional responses weren't working because the terrorists seemed to anticipate American tactics and countermeasures. A new approach was needed, and Maria's unique skills made her the obvious choice to develop and implement that approach. The mission that would define Maria's career was about to begin. She would be deployed to a region where American operatives had repeatedly failed to gather adequate intelligence about terrorist activities. Her job would be to succeed where others had failed, using methods that no one had tried before. The stakes couldn't be higher, and failure would likely mean death for both Maria and the American personnel she was trying to protect. Commander Phillips called Maria into his office for a briefing that would change everything. The mission he described was more dangerous than anything she had attempted before, but it was also more important. American lives were at risk, and traditional methods had proven inadequate. Maria would be operating alone in hostile territory with minimal support and no backup plan. Success would require every skill she had learned and some that she would have to develop on the spot. As Maria listened to the mission details, she felt the familiar excitement that came with a new challenge. She had spent years preparing for exactly this kind of opportunity. Her training, experience, and natural abilities had brought her to this moment. She was ready to prove that all the investment in her development had been worthwhile, and to show that sometimes the most unconventional approach was the only one that worked. The mission that would test everything Maria had learned took place in the mountainous border region between Afghanistan and Pakistan. A sophisticated terrorist network had been launching attacks against American and Allied forces with inside information that suggested they had infiltrated local security services. Multiple attempts by special operations teams to locate and neutralize the threat had failed, with several operations being compromised before they could begin. Maria's assignment was to infiltrate the region independently and identify the source of intelligence leaks while gathering information about planned attacks. She would operate under deep cover as a foreign aid worker, using an identity that had been carefully constructed over months. The mission was expected to last at least 6 months, during which she would have minimal contact with her handlers and no possibility of extraction if things went wrong. The preparation for this mission was unlike anything in Maria's previous experience. She spent months learning the local language, studying regional customs and religious practices, and developing expertise in humanitarian aid work that would make her cover identity credible. She learned to dress, move, and think like someone who had dedicated her life to helping others rather than gathering intelligence. Maria's insertion into the target area was accomplished through a legitimate aid organization that was unknowingly providing her cover. She joined a team of genuine humanitarian workers who were establishing medical clinics in remote villages. Her role as a logistics coordinator gave her reasons to travel throughout the region while maintaining contact with local officials and community leaders. The challenge of this mission went beyond traditional intelligence gathering. Maria had to gather information while actually providing humanitarian aid to people who desperately needed help. She couldn't maintain her cover by simply pretending to care about the local population. She had to genuinely contribute to their welfare while secretly investigating threats to American security. During her first month in the region, Maria established herself as a dedicated and competent aid worker. She helped set up medical clinics, coordinated supply deliveries, and worked directly with local communities to address their most pressing needs. Her genuine commitment to the work earned her respect and trust that would have been impossible to achieve through deception alone. The intelligence picture began to emerge slowly as Maria built relationships with local officials and community leaders. She discovered that the terrorist network was more sophisticated than American intelligence had realized. They weren't just receiving information from corrupt officials, they had actually recruited sympathizers within multiple government agencies and military units. What made the situation particularly dangerous was that the terrorist network was planning a major attack that would target American diplomatic facilities and military installations simultaneously. The operation was being coordinated by a former military officer who had extensive knowledge of American tactics and procedures. Traditional countermeasures would be ineffective because the planners understood how American forces would respond. Maria's investigation revealed that the key to the terrorist network was a man known locally as the Engineer. He was a former Pakistani military officer who had been dismissed from service for corruption but had retained extensive contacts within the security services. The Engineer was using these contacts to gather intelligence while recruiting operatives for increasingly ambitious attacks. Locating the Engineer became Maria's primary objective, but he was extremely security conscious and rarely appeared in public. He communicated through intermediaries and changed locations frequently, making traditional surveillance impossible. Maria had to develop new methods for tracking him that relied on understanding the social and economic networks he used to maintain his operations. The breakthrough came when Maria realized that the Engineer's operation required significant funding, which meant he needed regular contact with people who could provide money and supplies. By carefully observing the flow of resources through the local economy, she identified patterns that pointed to his support network. This economic intelligence led her to a series of seemingly legitimate businesses that were actually fronts for terrorist funding. Once Maria understood the Engineer's financial network, she could predict where he would appear and when. She spent weeks positioning herself to observe key meetings while maintaining her humanitarian work. The surveillance was extremely dangerous because any mistake would not only compromise her mission but also put the aid workers she was supposed to be protecting at risk. The critical moment came when Maria observed a meeting between the Engineer and a high-ranking official from the Pakistani intelligence service. The meeting revealed that the terrorist network had penetrated government security at the highest levels and was planning an attack that would coincide with a major diplomatic visit. American officials would be walking into a trap unless Maria could get word to her handlers. Communicating this intelligence to her superiors without compromising her cover required careful planning. Maria used a combination of coded messages hidden in routine aid work reports and dead drop locations that had been established during her mission preparation. The information had to be transmitted in a way that wouldn't alert local authorities or terrorist surveillance networks. The intelligence Maria provided allowed American and Pakistani security services to prevent the planned attack and arrest several key members of the terrorist network. However, the Engineer escaped the initial raids and began hunting for the source of the intelligence leak. Maria realized that her cover might be compromised and that she needed to either extract immediately or find a way to eliminate the threat permanently. Maria chose to stay and complete her mission. She understood that the Engineer would continue to pose a threat to American interests and local civilians until he was stopped permanently. Using her knowledge of his network and movement patterns, she developed a plan to locate him and provide the intelligence necessary for his capture or elimination by American Special Operations Forces. The final phase of the mission required Maria to take greater risks than ever before. She had to move beyond passive surveillance and actively maneuver the Engineer into a position where he could be targeted by a special operations team that was standing by across the border. This meant abandoning the relative safety of her humanitarian cover and operating as a true intelligence operative in hostile territory. Maria's plan worked by exploiting the Engineer's paranoia and need for control. She arranged for information to reach him that suggested one of his key supporters was planning to betray him. This forced the Engineer to arrange a face-to-face meeting to deal with the supposed threat, giving Maria the opportunity to provide precise targeting information to the Special Operations Team. The operation to eliminate the Engineer was a complete success. A small team of Navy SEALs crossed the border, conducted a precision strike on his compound, and extracted without detection. The Engineer and several of his key lieutenants were eliminated, effectively destroying the terrorist network that had been threatening American interests in the region. Maria's extraction from the area was accomplished through the same humanitarian aid channels that had provided her cover. She continued her aid work for several weeks after the Engineer's elimination, helping to ensure that the legitimate humanitarian mission could continue without being compromised by association with military operations. When Maria finally returned to the United States, she found that her success had made her something of a legend within the intelligence community. Her methods were being studied and incorporated into training programs throughout the military and intelligence services. She had proven that unconventional approaches could succeed where traditional methods failed. The personal cost of the mission had been significant. Maria had spent months living under constant threat while maintaining a false identity that required her to suppress her natural instincts and training. The psychological strain of the operation had tested her mental resilience in ways that no training exercise could simulate. She needed time to readjust to normal life and process the experiences that had changed her forever. Commander Phillips offered Maria several new assignments that would have advanced her career and increased her responsibilities within the intelligence community. However, Maria realized that she needed to find a balance between her commitment to national service and her need for a normal life. The isolation and constant danger of deep cover operations were taking a toll that she couldn't ignore. Maria chose to transition into a training role where she could pass on her skills and experience to new operatives while maintaining a more stable lifestyle. She became the lead instructor for advanced surveillance techniques at the facility where she had first learned her craft. Her students included SEALs, intelligence officers, and federal agents who needed to understand how to operate in the gray areas between military action and civilian law enforcement. The training programs Maria developed revolutionized how American intelligence services approached surveillance and infiltration operations. Her methods were based on understanding human psychology and social dynamics rather than just technology and tactics. She taught her students to become truly invisible by understanding how to blend into any environment and culture. Years after her retirement from active operations, Maria continued to be consulted on the most challenging intelligence problems facing American security services. Her reputation as Falcon became legendary among special operations personnel who understood that her unique combination of natural ability and professional training had created something unprecedented in military history. The young woman who had grown up tracking animals in the Texas desert had become one of the most effective intelligence operatives in American military history. Her success had proven that sometimes the most valuable assets come from unexpected places and that unconventional thinking can solve problems that defeat traditional approaches. Maria's story became required reading at military academies and intelligence training facilities across the United States. Her methods and philosophy influenced a generation of officers who understood that future threats would require new approaches and innovative thinking. The lessons she learned and taught continued to protect American interests around the world long after her active service ended. The SEALs who had once questioned whether a young woman from a small Texas town could contribute to their elite world had learned to respect and admire her unique capabilities. They understood that Maria Santos, known as Falcon, had redefined what it meant to be an effective military operative and had opened new possibilities for how America could protect itself in an increasingly complex and dangerous world. Looking back on her career, Maria realized that her grandfather had been right when he told her that some people are born with gifts that can serve a greater purpose. She had used her natural abilities not just for personal success but to protect others and serve her country in ways that few people could understand or appreciate. The Falcon that had inspired her nickname was indeed a perfect metaphor for what she had become, a patient, precise, and deadly effective hunter who struck only when necessary and never missed her target.